Hello, everybody. This is going viral. Today is the 5th of October, as far as I know, 2022. And we're going to start with a kind of small crowd here. Ken Aaron in Los Angeles, that's me. Dennis Goldstein in New Jersey. And Mike Jankowitz floating around somewhere in New York City, perhaps the Bronx or Manhattan, I'm not sure. And I'll be seeing you guys soon. But in any event, I want to start today's session with a graphic that I picked up about the upcoming population. Yeah, I want to start this meeting with a graphic about the upcoming population, which is going to reach 8 billion. So in order to do that, let me share the image with you. And there we go. So here we come. There it is. And share. So you can see it now. And let me make this larger. And I'm going to zoom in here a little bit to read it. And then we can discuss it. It's a world population when it hits 8 billion people around November of 2022. It's going to be 8 billion. And I thought it was hovering stably at 7.5 billion, but it's going to go up to 8 billion. Global population, and it's the distribution of the population that's significant, much more significant than the total number. So we have here these sub-satellite details. Well, let's just go take a look at the big banana here. And we see that the majority of the 8 billion people in this November is going to be 3 billion between China and India. 3 billion. Okay? Half and half. And so India's come right up. And of course, the Indian you can throw in there. It's just a small little sections that are adjacent to it, Bangladesh and Pakistan, which were created from the separation of the Muslims and Hindus back in, I guess that was, when was that, 49? And then China has, adjacent to it, North Korea and Japan. And you see the comparison. This graph is composed of population size. So you see how small the populations are on its immediate neighbors, South Korea, North Korea, and the rest of East Asia goes down to a minuscule 36 million people, which is just an hors d'oeuvre for China's 1.45 billion. And here we got the Middle East in this red fire engine red, Turkey, Iran, the rest of the Middle East, Yemen, Israel, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. And the rest of the Middle East, I guess that includes Israel, huh? And all of that, and Dubai and so forth. And then the other states on significance. Let's use the first one to find the United States in here somewhere. Oh, there it is. U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And Brazil is overwhelming in South America. Look at that. Brazil is 216 million. And in Venezuela, Argentina, what's that? The rest of South America, Peru, Colombia. Brazil is the big daddy. And in the U.S., it's just the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And then I guess that's the Caribbean. Is kind of, we only have one island in the Caribbean. This is Europe. Way over here, these light blue. This is Europe, very small. France, UK, Germany, the rest of Western Europe. And this is the rest of Northern Europe, Scandinavia. That's a light blue thing. Are you on a phone, Michael, or you can see these images? I don't know. Well,
no, I'm not on the phone.
Oh, you see it. Okay. So you see that how insignificant or small. Europe is comparable to North America in terms of population. It's about competitive size. And then we've got Poland, Russia, Ukraine, and then down here, and then we'll go to your guys' comments. Here's Indonesia. Now that's kind of large. because we really don't consider it. Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, Myanmar, Vietnam, Pacific Islanders. That's quite large. It's about 1.25 the size of the Middle East, and it's significant. It's a significant part there. And then the green thing, this yellow, goldenrod color, is Africa. This is all Africa, and here's Northern Africa, Egypt, Sudan, and Mar. I don't know what Mar is. So let's see, what is Mar? Mar, something M-A-R. Myanmar. Okay. Right. And the rest of Northern Africa. Not many people, just Egypt. The rest of the population, most of the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, but you've got Nigeria is the big one, Tanzania, Uganda, Ethiopia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and South Africa. But the big one is aggregated to the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. Whatever those states are, Liberia and others. So let's go to you, Mike. What comments you got to say about the 8 billion people? That's going to really
first of all, this graph, from a political point of view, this graph is misleading because you have, China is 1.41 billion, but you have it including Japan. And politically, you can't get too far opposite than Japan and China. But on the other hand, North Korea, and then it says the rest of East Asia. Also with India, you have it lumped together with Pakistan, which again...
Let me interrupt you. They're not lumped together. Pakistan is listed separately at 231 million. There's a thin line. You might not be able to see it. There's a line there.
Yeah, all right, now I can. And there's that line with Japan also.
Japan and so forth. They're just adjacent physically.
Right. Well, but in that sense, though, if you're talking about 8 billion people, China and India about evenly split for about 3 million of that, close to 3 billion, excuse me.
Yeah.
Out of 8 billion. On the other hand, though, China and India are not necessarily on the same page. So politically, there isn't any, shall we say, somebody holding all. No, there's nobody there holding all the cards or too many of the cards. Although China, the fact that it's not only technologically a major power, but it will also be it already is a major power population-wise, and just will expand. Although I have a question for both you guys. Has China's population, it says 1.45 billion. That seems to be a less substantial increase than most of the other countries in that region.
Yeah.
In the past 2 years.
Yeah, the graphs I've seen show that India and Africa are the ones with the highest rate of growth.
Right. So that makes a difference for the future. But then again, population does not denote power. Otherwise, the United States wouldn't be one of the leading powers in the world with that relatively small population.
Yeah.
So, but they did also say that it's going to reach 8 billion by next month.
Yeah. November 22nd.
Well, that doesn't give us a lot of time to plan, does it?
No. November. It says November. It doesn't say November 22nd. No, but the key thing is, I think, is as the size of these countries, and if they start eating meat or buying toasters or getting cars or wanting to have more electricity and power or start building more skyscrapers or whatever they do, it's going to be, because of the size of the populations, it's a big drain on global resources.
Well,
right now the U.S. absorbs 5 times more, or at least maybe 10 times more than the average global citizen in terms of resources. But these
Well, you don't have to worry about.
Yeah. Go
Right.
ahead.
You don't have to worry about most of India eating beef in particular. But I think what this relates to is, first of all, another question is, has the population of the world, the entire world population, been increasing at an accelerated pace, or has it more leveled out? In other words, what was the population of the world 10 years ago as opposed to 10 years before that? What is the rate of accelerated increase?
Well, okay, before we get to that, here's which the fertility rate, the rate of growth is highest. Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and what's that? Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and this purple one is low. Here's the fertility rate, 1. This is decreasing population. Fertility rate has to be 2.3 to maintain. So Russia, this is Russia, this big up here, and that's very low rate. And
Right.
and then Canada too. And what's that? This is Canada. This is the U.S. We also have a low rate. And but Africa
And Europe.
And Europe, everybody's got a low rate except for these Muslim states underneath Russia and India itself and China. Is that China? No, that's Mongolia.
Well, no, China
has 1.7. Also, that's what I was saying. China is decreasing, but India is increasing. India's rate is 2.2. It's maintaining. Australia is 1.7. Nobody's they're not breeding children. Except in Africa.
All of Europe. All of Europe and the UK and Ireland.
Look at those blue-eyed Swedes. They're not going to last that long. And
Well,
Sweden is 1.8, and Norway is 1.6, and Finland is 1.4. They're going bye-bye.
Right.
And Russia is 1.6. And Greenland is 1.6. Everything is 1.6. God. And this is Canada.
Right.
Low.
Which is why Canada is trying to increase its immigration, at least among younger people.
Yeah.
But
Here's a big one, Argentina, 2.3. I mean, that's 2.7 in Bolivia, and 2.3 in Peru, and let's see, Mexico. Mexico is 2.1, and the U.S. is 1.7. So, and
Now-
it's high, it's 2 in El Salvador, or whatever. So that's
Now,
that.
Ken,
Yeah, go ahead.
another question we should examine is, what are the natural resources in those countries, particularly in the countries that are expanding the most, whose population is increasing the most, because that will give us a hint of what of one of the meanings this will have for what happens in the future.
Well, the countries here, these 10 countries here that I've highlighted, 10 countries with the highest fertility rate, all in Africa, all of them in Africa. And it's not a question of what their potential resources is, because, it's a question of, who's that? We're going to admit that person. Oh, it's Frank. Hi,
Good.
Frank. Hello, Frank. It's a question of what can they reasonably, extract or get organized and live with. And they can just live and die, fine. And in other words, Africa is obviously very fertile, below the Sahara, but it's mostly jungle.
Right.
And then the consequences of even turning it into, look at that fertility rate. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, 5.9, 5.5, 5.2, 5. And the thing is, I think, now here's the discussion. I mean, this is really a prejudicial viewpoint I'm going to present, but I think it's correct. A country like the United States or England or maybe Australia too, and definitely China, has tiers of organizational entities, religious, corporate, clubs, in the U.S., cultural groups. So there's a tier, there's layers of organization. And then there's an overstructure layer supposed to be federal. Of course, we also have the states and the cities. All this organizational hierarchy, or like leaves in a pile of leaves. And it's all supposed to be covered by the federal government, which tries to maintain uniform normalcy on some high-level principles. But I don't think you have that in the majority of countries in Africa. So what I'm always hearing about Africa, in Nigeria, and in Burundi, and Burkina Faso, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mali, is guerrilla people fighting to get to the top, and there's only a few organizations, 4 to 5 at the most. And so that, to me, I think leads to more instability, makes it harder to control things. That's what I think. So when you go to like Israel, Italy, Germany, there's all kinds of factions in the parliament. I don't think you have that in Africa. And I don't think you have that much in South America. But this is the thing. These are the 10 fastest growing rates. What do you think the consequences of that's going to be? How about Dennis or Frank? Any comments on that? Frank, to just go back for you for a second. Let me go like this.
You need to talk louder.
Yeah, let me go. I was asking Frank, what do you think about that? The world's going to be hitting 8 billion people in very shortly, November. So we were just looking at graphs about that. I'll see if I can find it again. History, total fertility rate, ODDO, what's this? There it is. Here's the fertility rate around the world, and world population. Here you go, Frank. Let's take a look at that. Can you see that, Frank?
Yeah, I'm looking.
You speak up, please.
Yes, you can hear me, can you?
I can barely.
Can't hear Frank.
That's better, a little bit. No, that was Dennis. You got to get closer to the mic.
That's odd because it normally works.
Now it does.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're looking at this projection here. This November of 2022, the world will reach 8 billion people, and this is the general breakdown of the populations. China, India, here's the U.S. in blue, here's South America in green, this is a big one, the Pacific Islanders, Indonesia, Thailand, Myanmar, Philippines, Vietnam, and this is Sub-Saharan Africa, and this is Northern Africa, and this is South America, and this is the Middle East. So we're talking about the consequences of this that's creeping up on us, and we were just looking before about the 10...
Show me the fertility rates there. I thought you were going to...
we're looking at the fertility rates that are bringing us to this, fulfilling this. Because it's like these people are China's fairly stable. India's got an increasing fertility rate, and mostly Africa has the highest. So let me get to that again. I just think the most efficient way is to do it this way. Here we go. And fertility rates by country. And
Have you got Europe or the United States?
Let's see. Okay, it's hard. I should have put these in separate windows. Fertility rates, 1 second. That doesn't do me any good, does it? Oh, I know what. There we go. Yeah, here's the fertility rates. All of the purple ones are at 1 to 1.5. That includes Russia, the U.S., Canada, and Brazil. Brazil's only 1.7. But when we go to Africa, the rates are 5.9, 4.7. All of these countries here.
Well, obviously,
I've heard this bit.
heard this before, but Nigeria, with a population of 218 million, is going to surpass China in about 20 years.
Right.
So Nigeria, which is not a big, really not relatively much smaller than China, will have a
5.4, a rate 5.4, sixth fastest growth rate.
Yeah. So since they've got a large population already, so that's going to be interesting. Africa is obviously going to comprise most of the population of the world in 20 years.
Well, if things stay the same, yeah.
Right.
So Frank, Michael brought up an interesting point you might have a comment about, which is the areas in Africa, let's say, where the population is booming. What about their ability to acquire subsistence from that, agricultural and energy and so forth?
Well, it seems that they are doing it right now. I mean, they're able to sustain themselves, except obviously in Somalia. But generally speaking, there's no reason why they can't, over time, adopt the same sort of hybrid crops that, say, Denmark has or anywhere else in Europe, and increase crop yields exponentially. So, they probably will be able to sustain this growth. It depends on, of course, the women and what their role will be in their societies, whether or not it's going to stay a patriarchal sort of top down that way construct, as opposed to over here where women are treated differently. There is what's going on actually in Iran is extremely important, actually, relative to all these male-dominated societies that keep the women down. This is a grassroots thing going on in Iran right now, where women are taking the helm. Now, what was the difference between that and Afghanistan is that Afghanistan, we showed the way, and, men didn't seem to necessarily click with the idea that women should have more rights than they do, and weren't willing to stand up and fight for them. Whereas in Iran, they are. So the big question is whether women's political clout will increase in Africa such that they can, show that they are an essential part of the economy, and also of, the political governments, right? The governments. And that will bring the fertility rate down. But, it's tough to do. It's tough to do given the fact that it's an entrenched thing in Africa, that, the man is the big man. Actually, when I was in Liberia, it's not just the man who's in charge, it's the big man. And it's tough to, it's going to be difficult for them to break that mold and that grip on society. So I can't anticipate anything else but in a massive increase in population and disparities and class and all that stuff, and also massive poverty too at times.
Here's an interesting thing that you brought up Afghanistan. I put this up on the screen. Afghanistan's fertility rate was one of the highest in the world in the 1990s at 8.0. The country's current fertility rate is 4.5. This reduction is credited to the fact that more Afghan women are receiving an education and getting jobs. After the Taliban was ousted from Afghanistan, NATO countries provided aid that helped fund schools, family planning services, and birth control. Additionally, infant mortality rates have also plummeted. What effect the Taliban's reclaiming the country might have upon these advancements, as well as fertility rate, will take some years.
Go through the roof. It'll go through the roof because, first of all, it was clear that young men preferred that domination of family and society by other men. And they weren't willing to fight for the rights of women. But like I said, what's going to happen in Iran is extremely interesting right now. And that may have a, cascading effect on all those societies. But, but of course the Revolutionary Guard are going to have some say in that at some point. And same thing, when you've got a captain or a major or a colonel taking over a country, just like Burkina Faso, in like half an hour, they just, tool in with a couple of trucks or a couple of jeeps and then say, I'm in charge. It's there's something profoundly pathetic about that. But what are you going to do? I don't know. There needs to be a cultural shift that can only come from education, massive alteration in the education system, and also there needs to be some clear advantages from it, but it's just not happening. I mean, if you look at it everywhere else in the world, population growth's going down to nothing practically. I don't know which is the lowest. I think who's got the lowest fertility rate? Probably Italy.
South Korea.
Oh, right. Okay.
Here they are.
Yeah.
South Korea, Puerto Rico, Hong Kong. But this is all Asian.
Now, Spain. Spain and you. Spain's the first one. Yeah, there it is. Italy's pretty low too.
But it's these are lower. So
South Korea, it's what's happened in society relative, that men have become second-class citizens in so many ways.
Well, the women are smarter and they look better,
Yeah, well, that's the trouble. It's like you look. I'm near Colombia. It's like everybody's. The only people who are men are these wimpy-looking Asian guys, and there's a couple of guys who might be. There's a couple of studs who probably
take care of everybody.
They have the time of their lives because it's everybody's. All the students are female. It's incredible.
Now you think it's because they're putting I forgot the name of the female hormones in the cows to make them fatter when they go to auction.
Or it's plastic or something. It's like
something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like everybody wants to be a woman. Everybody, the woman wannabes out there are just like falling over themselves. It's like it's incredible. But from a woman's point of view, it's like, where do you go? You go to another woman, or do you go to one of these flaky kind of guys, or fluffy guys, as the Ukrainians call them, fluffy.
Right, fluffy guys. Also, I think somebody was bringing up to me the fact that China, because of technology, you can determine what kind of a child you are going to have, and in China, they don't allow women to be born, so they have a bad ratio of men to women.
Well, they did that. I think they did that. I don't know if that's the same case now, but there are about 100 million men who,
are no mates.
There are no mates for them. So, that's always an incentive for a good war if you've got too many guys. But I don't know. What's going on in Ukraine doesn't look like it's a good idea for China to do anything at the moment because American technology is so it's such a massive advantage that, you even try and cross a border, you get waxed. This is amazing. It's what is going to happen in 10 years. I mean, as far as immigration from Africa, forget about it. They'll be walking on each other to get out of there.
That's right.
And through anywhere to get to here.
Yeah. And it's all like southern states that have. Well, I'm looking, here's another list of fertility rates with all the countries. Fertility rates country. Now, I think fertility rate is people born against people dying. In other words, the increase in population. Or maybe it's the number of children born per woman in a lifetime, Like the average woman has 5.7 children.
Yeah, obviously, I think what absolutely has to happen is there needs to be proof that if you put a woman out there who's educated, you get more money into the family, and it's like take a second seat. If you're the guy, it's like forget about it. You're too stupid to do anything. So just sit down and allow. It's these entertainment industries and all the other kind of sedentary stuff that women excel at that actually make the money. It's basically embroidery when you're doing anything to do with a laptop. If you're doing programming, you're essentially doing medieval embroidery. But it makes money, makes a lot of money if you know what you're doing. So the advice would be for Africa is to start to get your act together and realize the potential of women as they are in everywhere else in the developed countries. So that helps.
Frank, I have a question though. When you take a country like the United States or Canada, which has a relatively low fertility rate and a relatively smaller population per square inch, doesn't the disproportionate amount of natural resources per person, isn't that going to cause problems with countries where there's a much lower, shall we say, much lower amount of natural resources per person? I mean, isn't that going to, not only for crises, but possibly for wars?
Well, yes, but if you look at the most densely populated place on the planet is actually the Netherlands. Okay, that's an example of a place that knows how to utilize what it's got, and okay, it has advantages over some and disadvantages over others, but there's the technology out there to actually feed everybody quite comfortably. It's not doing a lot of good for the earth, that we know. I mean, you have to know how to use the fertilizers such that you rejuvenate the earth to a certain extent, but even that is dangerous because it's all climate change and stuff. But there's no reason why Africa can't have the population that we've that's projected. But again, it's you need to have an intelligentsia that knows how to do this form of agriculture, and then that works against population growth because you've got the requisite education to realize that women make professionals in every corner of the job market, but that's not happening in Africa. I mean, women are just seen as baby machines. So
okay, wait a minute. We know that industrial science, like management theory and computer programs, mathematics, all that. What about moving to a Brave New World thing, where the gender and the population is controlled and created with guidance from the state to keep things balanced, so that there's no major distress over distribution of resources. Everybody's born in a petri dish. Everybody's raised in a communal society. Anybody, sex is just for recreation, and you monitor where people live and so forth. In other words, you manage just the way you would manage growing chickens. You manage the population to make it more optimum. And then let's say that's an extreme, but let's say we move towards that by giving appropriate tax deductions based on the number of people in the family or something like that.
Well, if we're talking about Africa, I mean, it would require a Soviet-style state. I mean, it was calculated that China lost 384 million kids from the way that they forcefully aborted you know, way back then when you were only allowed to have one kid or wwhatever it was.
One child policy.
One child policy, right? So that's a lot of kids, and that's a huge number of that's an immense number of potential
Taxpayers.
well, not just taxpayers, but yeah, obviously employees, and you know they're gonna suffer for that. So you know, if you are going to do that, and you have to have state control, and the only one state that really can work that is an authoritative, autocratic sort of dictatorship, which would, that's normally one person like a Putin, and you're not going to get that in Africa. So a communist state, yeah, maybe, a la China, but don't see that either. It's hard to imagine what form of state management there could be for Africa. You know, first of all, they'd all have to be under one state, one control. I mean, who would that I can't. I mean, unless China suddenly backed somebody in one state and said, conquer everybody, that's not going to happen. So, there has to be a proof of concept that works somewhere else first before it's adopted there. And I don't think it's going to happen here, although it is happening, obviously, to a certain degree. I mean, the idea of being asexual or bisexual is now seemingly quite popular. It's like
that can't work. It's gonna. I think it's too unnatural.
You might think it's unnatural, but people are. Whatever you think is natural, right. Somebody's going to rebel against it and say no, that it's the best thing. There should be a new normal. A new normal is being always projected from the left. It's like whatever the status quo was, and whoever backed it, whatever conservative nut job backed it, they're going to go and say that we are going to alter it completely, 180 degrees to it, and that's the way it is because, they hate the previous class.
Well, let me just interject here for a second. First of all, you can't force. Well, in other words, for most people, they're attracted to whomever they're attracted to. You could say something is more in vogue, or the flavor of the month or whatever, but that doesn't mean that most people are going to say, okay, well, I'm going to do that because it's in vogue. I'm sure there will be some, but most people just go about their lives basically doing what they need to do and doing what they want to do. But I have another question to put in here.
Wait. But that's not quite true, because parents are the ones who are making decisions for youngsters, and that and how they're reared actually determines which way they're going. And you say, oh, that's not true. No, it's well, actually, it's proving that the persuasiveness of culture is so great that you can turn parents into maniacal determinants of their children's gender and whatever, and there's nothing that the kid can do about it. And they're backed by, once you've got a movement and people actually believing that that's the way it should be, there's no stopping it. No stopping it. It's quite clearly true. I mean, they'll be marrying dogs next, and what are your favorite animal? Your husband or wife, it seems. I mean, that's a bit cynical, but there's no stopping what people will do in order to be individualistic, first of all, and that's okay. I guess that's okay. That's the way, the American way in particular, but it's also the first world way is to you've got to stand out somehow. And if you're multi-gendered, that's clever.
Yeah, we get into the sphere of alternative realities. 2 + 2 = 5, etc.
Talk louder, please.
Yes, go ahead. Okay, talk louder. Dennis, what do you think about the sexual revolution in terms of transgender, not in terms of
I don't
more
think
sex?
anything about it.
You don't know anything about it?
No, I said I don't think anything about it.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it's going to help population control at all. Population control, it depends on equality of women. And equality of women depends on whether we have socialism or capitalism. If you have capitalism, you're through. We have to evolve into a socialist world. And that's the key to equality for women and for all people.
If it was a social, let me do a follow-up on that. Would a socialist society control whether or not you had to get married and how many children you had to have?
No, I just think it would create more opportunities for people to do.
Well, what if
to actually create something else besides the old
No, wait a second. I mean, in a socialist society, I got two bus drivers, Jack and Sam. Jack has one kid that he works and he helps at home and he plays sports with, and he got him into college. And Sam has 8 kids and he never sees them. But they're both bus drivers. They both make the same income. How does that work in socialism? If you have different amounts of children.
No, it doesn't work that way. What happens is, under socialism, more people have more opportunities, and there's more equality. And the greater equality means that people are doing other things besides having babies.
Would there be a restriction on number of kids you could have?
Probably not.
Probably not. Okay, so all right, so it would take care of itself. If the person with 8
if you have
kids,
more opportunity, the whole idea is to educate women and give women more opportunities to do more things in society and the economy. And if women had equality, the world around, and other people, I mean, men had equality also, people would be having more opportunities to do more things that they wanted to do besides having babies. How's that?
that's something. Any other comments on that, Frank? Do you think that the world would be better if there was some kind of regulation on the birth fertility rate?
Well, I'm just taking umbrage with that. You know, the idea that women make money. That's in a capitalist state, they make money, and so that overrides everything else. In an educated, the educated workforce, or educated country period, the bottom line of capitalism, unfortunately, is in fact the profit. It's competition and profit. So if women are making money, it doesn't damn matter who's in charge. It's like, put a woman in charge. If she's making money, that's great. And so, capitalism itself, corporations, etc., they don't care about what's right or wrong for society. They just simply want they have a bottom line. And at the moment, educated women are more dedicated and more reliable in the workplace than men. And so certainly in almost every tier of management, but certainly at management levels below maybe the top. So, there is a bit of a glass ceiling still, but not in every industry. If it's making money, in Africa, nobody's making any money. Okay. It's a lot of handouts, a lot of things. They're just not making money in the same. They haven't copied the model here, and and you need a very educated workforce to be able to copy the Swedish model or whatever model you're going to copy, Japanese model. Well, once you do that, or South Korea, obviously, once you do that, then your birth rate's going to go down to half a third of what it is in Africa right now. So yeah, capitalism is not the culprit. It's not. It's actually backwardness and the inability to I don't know. It's the education system and equality, right? I mean, education systems should bring equality through the political system. It should, but that's why what's going on in Iran is so absolutely important for the world, because young women, children are rebelling against this orthodox nut jobbery, okay, of the mullahs, and that's a big deal. If that works, and young men say, okay, if I've got any gonads at all, I need to stand up to the the powers that be, because women are sacrificing themselves on the street. Like I said, Afghan men couldn't give a crap about women, but it seems to be turning the other way in Iran. It seems to be that young men in particular are starting to say, okay, these women are being killed, so I'm going to stand up to the authorities, and that takes some guts. But I can't see that happening in Africa for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go to another topic. Do we want to go to Ukraine or my documentary about what led America to be omnipotent in the world? I think we should play that. I don't think you guys are otherwise going to see it. I did send it out, but let's see what happens if I put this on. I think this, oh yeah, here it is right here. And so, well, let me close that a second and make sure that I'm sharing it correctly. Yes, I am. Okay. And here we go. And here comes. And this is very interesting.
Rest of the planet. Economically, the United States has continuously remained the world's largest economy since the 1890s, and is the only country that has ended every single decade with a larger economy than it started with for the past 150 years. The US dollar is the primary reserve currency used by most of the world's nations. America's government is the second longest continuously run regime in the world, and despite making up just 5% of the contemporary human population, the United States controls around 30% of the entire planet's wealth and produces 20% of all global manufacturing. And complementing America's tremendous economic might is also her unprecedented military strength. The US military alone represents nearly 40% of all worldwide military spending. The US Navy represents half of the worldwide naval fleet. The United States controls more than 750 overseas military bases across every conceivable theater of the world, enabling America to attack any threat anywhere on the surface of the planet in less than 48 hours. And while there are many factors that contribute towards this unprecedented global power and influence of the United States, the biggest reason for it, and the true source from which all American power stems, is the fact that the geography and the geology of the North American continent itself is just insanely overpowered from a civilization building standpoint. In fact, it's so outrageously overpowered that it's not even really fair to any of Earth's other civilizational start points, and it was almost inevitable that any civilization that began where the United States did, regardless of people or ideology, would have eventually emerged as the dominant global superpower. So allow me to explain in depth why that's the case. To begin with, the core geographic reason of America's global power and the core of the North American continent itself is almost certainly the Mississippi River, and the vast basin that surrounds it, wedged in between the high Rocky Mountains in the west and the low Appalachian Mountains in the east, interconnecting with the Illinois, Ohio, Tennessee, Red, Arkansas, and Missouri rivers as well. Most of the tributary rivers that feed into this enormous system, spanning 1/3 of the entire continent, begin at relatively low elevations, which effectively means that the majority of the basin's rivers are calm and absent of any obstacles like rapids, and have therefore been easily navigable for thousands of years without the need for any advanced technology, expensive development, or infrastructure. The most important thing to understand about the Mississippi River itself is that it is the longest navigable river in the world, meaning that since time immemorial, anyone could essentially sail a boat carrying supplies or people from the Gulf of Mexico into the Mississippi's mouth and up more than 3,000 kilometers deep into the North American interior before hitting the river's only natural waterfall here, which, without coincidence, is exactly where the twin cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul was settled. The navigable section of the Mississippi River from these waterfalls down to the delta in the Gulf of Mexico is more than 3 times the length of the Rhine in Europe, and a third longer than even the Danube, Europe's second longest river. Navigable rivers like the Mississippi or the Rhine are tremendously valuable to generating economic activity because they are substantially cheaper to use as transportation of goods and people than land-based infrastructure. Roads and railways require not only high initial costs to construct, but high ongoing maintenance costs to keep them functioning and running as well. Whereas rivers are already there and are basically just free to use. The only costs involve creating ports and boats to carry stuff up and down them. And as a result of that, shipping products by water as opposed to land is anywhere from 10 to 30 times less expensive in the modern 21st century era. And civilizations who have more navigable rivers will be able to retain substantially higher amounts of profits from all the capital that they'll be saving on transportation costs.
How do you build a company that lasts?
This fact instantly makes the Mississippi River, as the longest navigable river in the world, tremendously economically valuable to anybody who controls it. Farms and factories built along or nearby the 3,000 kilometers of its banks between the Delta and the Gulf of Mexico and the waterfalls at Minneapolis-St. Paul are capable of cheaply exporting their products further downstream and out into the world ocean toward global markets. But the Mississippi River itself is only the main stem of the overall greater network of navigable rivers found across the greater Mississippi Basin, granting settlements as deep into the interior of North America as Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, Minneapolis, Chicago, Sioux City, St. Louis, Memphis, Muskogee, Shreveport, and more to effectively become oceanic ports, all capable of exporting their various products cheaply down the Mississippi River network towards the Gulf of Mexico. But it isn't just this uniquely vast system of internally navigable rivers within North America that give this continent such an advantage to commerce. It's also the fact that around much of North America exists another highly unique geographic feature that cannot be found anywhere else in anywhere near such a useful pattern. The many, many barrier islands that exist in an almost continuously uninterrupted chain for more than 4,800 kilometers, around 3/4 of the US Gulf and East coasts. From the southernmost tip of Texas, where the Rio Grande empties into the Gulf, up to the Chesapeake Bay that harbors Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. In effect, these countless low and flat islands have transformed what would otherwise be 4,800 kilometers of exposed coastline into a network of protected, shielded bays that can be effectively utilized as a sort of oceanic river, relatively navigable all the way from Brownsville, Texas to Baltimore, Maryland. And since the delta of the Mississippi River empties out directly into this further navigable network, it means that goods have been able to be cheaply, reliably, and quickly transported from all throughout the North American interior to all across the Gulf and East coasts now for hundreds of years. When collectively added together, the internal rivers of the Mississippi Basin and this external intracoastal waterway wrapping around the Gulf and East coasts account for nearly 25,000 kilometers of combined navigable waterways, which is not only more than the rest of North America combined, but more than the rest of the entire planet combined. The end result is the greatest natural transportation system to be found anywhere in the world. An enormous network of freely available riverine superhighways that causes 90% of the lower continental 48 United States to be within just 240 kilometers of an easily navigable waterway. And it was all just effectively given to the United States more than 2 centuries ago, back in 1803, when the French decided to sell all of it for about $340 million in today's currency valuation. And then, the power that this system of natural navigation offers the United States is even further exacerbated when you consider that it spans across what also just so happens to be the largest contiguous stretch of arable farmland on the planet as well, the American Midwest. The westernmost portion of the Midwest, located within the rain shadow cast by the towering Rocky Mountains of the continent, is dry but temperate and perfect for growing wheat like Ukraine and southern Russia, while the central portion is temperate and humid, perfect for growing corn and soybeans. Today, an area more than twice the size of France is under till within the Midwest alone, and as a result, this region produces nearly a third of the entire planet's supply of corn and soybeans, and more than $150 billion worth of agricultural produce overall per year. And all of this enormous agricultural land happens to also roughly overlap with the world's largest network of easily navigable rivers. It is a perfect natural recipe for an agricultural superpower to develop from. And when further considering the fact that the Intracoastal Waterway Network further services the transportation needs of everything from Texas to Maryland, the Columbia and Snake Rivers flow through the agricultural zones of the Pacific Northwest, and the San Francisco Bay and Sacramento River help out within the Central Valley of California, you can quickly see that with very few exceptions, the vast majority of all of America's agricultural regions are within just 240 kilometers of a navigable waterway to the ocean, enabling food grown across the rural parts of the continent to easily and cheaply be transported to the same continent's urban population centers in a way that simply no other continent on the Earth could ever match. And we're still pretty much just at the beginning here of explaining the sheer scale of North America's geographic advantages towards maritime power and commerce, because you also have to consider the many, many natural indentations of the continental coastline itself that creates many of the greatest natural oceanic deep water harbors in the world. In order for a natural harbor to make a good port, they must really have three crucial ingredients: deep passages for shipping, enough resources in the immediate hinterland to support cities that can support the port, and plenty of coastal frontage area. When only considering natural harbors across the world that possess all three of those critical factors, the top three largest of them are all within continental North America and controlled by the United States outright. The Chesapeake Bay between Maryland and Virginia, the San Francisco Bay surrounded by California, and the Puget Sound of Washington State. These three are arguably the most impressive natural harbors found anywhere on the surface of the Earth, while the Chesapeake Bay itself, all on its own, has a longer coastline than the entirety of India combined. When added together, the entire coastline of the modern United States is well over 3.5 times the length of the entire African continent, despite the fact that Africa itself is more than 3 times larger than the United States in terms of overall land. This means that the United States coastline on the Atlantic, Gulf, and Pacific has a greater overall potential for ports than any other country on the Earth, bar none, and can even fit in significantly more ports than entire other continents are capable of. And then there's also the fact that with a little modern civil engineering, the United States acquired a second enormous internal navigable waterway in the mid-20th century, the Great Lakes. Due to the fact that the Great Lakes are naturally full of rapids, like, Niagara Falls, and the fact that the connections between the lakes often freeze over during the winter, they were never naturally navigable on their own all the way through history until the very late 1950s, when a series of locks and canals were completed by the Americans and Canadians. Now, the Great Lakes serve as a complementary internal water transportation system to the Mississippi Basin and Intracoastal Waterway, enabling even further cities deep within the continent to effectively become oceanic ports, from Duluth to Detroit to Cleveland and Buffalo. And then there's the fact that through a series of artificial canals, the Mississippi Basin system and the Great Lakes system are now connected with each other, and barges can effectively freely navigate with their cargoes in a giant circle around the entire eastern United States. But great as it is, the Mississippi Basin does contain a couple of critical geographic vulnerabilities that can be exploited by America's enemies, and both revolve essentially around New Orleans, the most strategically important city in the entire United States, because it serves as the gates between the entire Mississippi River superhighway network and the Intracoastal Waterway and Gulf of Mexico. Should New Orleans ever fall into enemy hands or be somehow destroyed, the link between the greatest river network for transportation in the world and the global ocean would be blocked, and the whole system, along with the American economy, would effectively break down. And there are theoretically two, arguably easier ways to accomplish this, besides from capturing or destroying New Orleans itself. The first way is to take advantage of Cuba. You see, Cuba is probably the most strategically valuable piece of the North American board that the United States doesn't outright control or have significant influence over. This is because of the way the island juts into the Gulf of Mexico, creating two straits that all ships coming back and forth through the Gulf and the Greater World Ocean have no other choice but to pass through. The Florida Straits in the north, or the Yucatan Strait in the south. All on its own, Cuba is too small of an island to ever leverage the strategic position to threaten the trade of America's underbelly between New Orleans, the Mississippi Basin, the Intracoastal Waterway, and the outside world. But when placed under the sway of a major power from another continent, it absolutely can be, as nearly happened during the early 1960s.
Okay, well, I'm going to cut out on that because that's enough for today's lesson. I found that very intriguing, and the whole build-up to the liability, the exposure to some other power getting control of Cuba was significant. I even went to take a look at a map to see if they were really representing it correctly. And it's something we don't really pay that much attention to. But when you see that everything's funneling down to New Orleans and Cuba's sitting right there, if it were empowered, it could close off the Florida Straits or the Yucatan Straits, and have just a threat of it would be significant. But it's interesting. I found that presentation interesting in terms of the development of the United States with its manifest destiny to go from the East Coast to the West Coast, and it's the consequences of that facility for transportation on the seas in terms of its current status in the world. And, and all of that razzmatazz at the beginning about all the 270 places we have around the world and so forth. So I think it is remarkable that Africa suffers from a lack of seaports because it doesn't have the kind of convoluted shorelines that we have, coming in to create a bay. What they're talking about is when it says we have more coastal line than India or Africa, it's talking about if you walked along the coast and kept the measure of the distance. It's not the air distance, it's walking along the edge of the water, that we have this incredibly long coastline, which enables us to have ports and activities and so forth. That's all. So I thought it's good to take a simple viewpoint like that and consider it. There's more to the world. There's geoeconomics and geopolitics that are influencing, I think, have at least an equivalent influence to political systems or politics and personalities, megalomaniacs and nasty people and beneficial, wonderful people, and equitable systems and justice and all of that stuff. Yeah. But what matters is the mountains and the plains and the oceans and the rivers and the seasons and the weather and the crops and what you can grow and other things like that, and how habitable is a place. That's also important. But that's all. I'm done talking about that. Go ahead, Mike, and put your hands up.
I
Put
just
your
want
hands
to add
up.
in what the guy didn't seem to.
He didn't cover everything.
No, obviously he didn't cover New York or Los Angeles. But the fact is, though, we also have large borders on both oceans, on the two largest oceans in the world.
Yeah.
And that's both as far as commerce and the military, that's also vastly important. Up until the end of World War II, or the post-war era, the fact that also the United States and Canada, and for that matter Mexico, the fact that they were pretty much isolated from anything, pretty isolated from the rest of the world, gave it a military advantage. Obviously, in World War II, the U.S. and Canada were the only allied powers that couldn't be bombed from enemy territory. So and it was difficult to get there, to get any significant warships there. Submarines did manage to get to the East Coast and one or two to the West Coast. But basically, I think the guy hit the point where it was just all these multiple factors that just had to do with the geography and the geology of the country, which, by the way, in 1776 or 1775, I should say, nobody fighting in the U.S. War of Independence had any conception of what was going on inland, or what there was inland. They didn't even know what they were fighting for or what it would culminate in eventually. So that's interesting also.
Right. I just want to point out, I stopped halfway through. So it's like a 40-minute thing, and he does go on. But, I like the presentation myself. It seems to be objective. What do you think, Frank? You're the logistics. You're the master of logistics.
No, I'm not. But, you know, you've also got to compare the Yangtze and the Yellow River. These are two massive rivers on their own, and they explain a lot for China by comparison with the Mississippi. And again, the Volga-Dnieper River is probably longer than the Mississippi, if you combine the two of them. But of course, they get frozen over during the winters, parts of them anyway. So, you know, the potential is there, but it came to fruition here. Now, one of the big events that people in the United States do not appreciate, and I should write a book about it one day, is the fact that the French Revolution was the gift of the gods to the United States. The killing, the regicide, the guillotining of Louis XVI made the United States what it is today. And this is the most incredible thing. And people do not understand why that is. Because the French were so stupid as to kill their king. Mostly peasants out of, well, they were lawyers. I know what they were. Yes, okay, coming out of Paris. But you see, what they did by doing that is they removed the Bourbon compact between France and Spain. That compact made the United States possible in the first place because it enabled the Washington's rebels to hold out for as long as they did, because there was a French and Spanish Navy that held the British in check and enabled, obviously, Rochambeau and the rest of them to land, and the whole thing with Yorktown. So that was the 13 colonies. But you see, it was owned by Mississippi, and everything over towards California was actually owned by the Spanish, and then handed over to the French, the Mississippi. And so you've got Spain doing very nicely, going up the California coast towards Alaska. Well, no, actually the Russians are coming towards Alaska, but they're going up towards Vancouver and that area. And you got, of course, the French owned the Mississippi, and you know, Florida was going one way or the other with either one of those two powers. So actually, when the French Revolution happened, obviously the French had to side against the Bourbon Spain. So Spain switched sides and came on the side of the British. So all their viceroyalties in South America collapsed over time because of that one single event. And it also made possible the acquisition, of course, of Mississippi, and then everything west of that. And so, you know, it was all because of that one single stupid act by the French. And the French will never admit it either. But it was dumb as a jar of dirt. I mean, really. So, you know, that's something else that people should realize.
I've never heard that twist on those events before. I would have a different viewpoint.
What is it, Mark? What's your viewpoint?
Well, I mean, first of all, Napoleon was constantly having coalitions against him by the British, so he was up to his neck in wars, and he needed the money. That's why he plus Louisiana had next to no French in it. Only 80% of the French in Louisiana were in New Orleans, and anyone here who doesn't think that the Americans would have eventually taken Louisiana anyway, like they took Texas. I mean, they sold at least they got some money out of it.
Well, wait a minute. Well, wait a minute. You got to understand Napoleon. First of all, Napoleon came to power, and he is in a situation where there is, as you pointed out, a coalition against him, and that's all because of the French Revolution. France under Louis XVI and XV were very, very powerful entities Louis XIV in particular, entities in Europe and the world. They had massive navies, okay? So what was Napoleon going to do if he wanted to recreate the power of France? Well, he had to fight off everybody because that's what he inherited. He inherited wars against the coalition that was started by the French Revolution. So, you know, what did he do? Well, he sold the Louisiana Purchase. Yeah, he had to because he needed the money to go and fight against Austro-Hungary, which was allied to Louis XVI by marriage. through.
Yeah, beforehand. Yeah.
So the world power of France under Louis XVI was never was never emulated or never equaled, so I say, by Napoleon. Even though he took most of Europe at one point, he never had a navy because it was given up because of the French Revolution. Spain had an enormous navy. Both of them outnumbered the British. Once they split up, it was all over, and it was about naval power. Everything depended on that. There was no way, by the way, and this is an interesting fact, you know who made the best ships in the world at this particular point? Where
Britain?
they were made?
Britain?
Nope.
U.S.
Nope.
No.
US were making tiny little frigates because Jefferson wouldn't spend the money on anything else but frigates.
Yeah.
You know where the best ships were made?
Japan.
Havana, Cuba.
Oh, Havana.
Havana, Cuba made the best and biggest ships, wooden ships in the world, arguably. I mean, triple tiered, bigger than the Victory, massive ships. The Havana Harbor was amazing in that respect. Okay. And look where it is today, what it potentially was under Spain, and look what the pathetic situation it is today. This made no sense. This makes no sense if you look at it from, yes, America has blossomed because of the Mississippi Valley and Mississippi and owning all of California. Obviously it has, but that was not the case. It would never have happened if it wasn't for the French Revolution and the stupidity of a handful of lawyers and middle-class scumbags in France.
Okay, wait a minute, guys. Now, I'm not a historian, but let me point out something. All of these European dynasties were monarchies, okay? I think.
Right.
All right. The U.S. has, let's say, something in between. It has a regulated monarchy where
Republic.
the king, it's a republic, but the king is all, changed every 4 years. Once the Constitution is implemented, the king changes every 4 years. And then, we had one king who stayed in power for 20 years, but they changed it and made it 8 years. So that gave you stability, predictability, a kind of. In these other countries, with the monarchies, you always had, the king died, and now the children and the cousins and the people fighting for the throne, unless he was, unless it was very stable and they had an equivalent, a peaceful turnover. There were like assassinations and everything for who was the heir to the throne. And this isn't just Europe; it's also Asia, China, the same history. I don't know about Africa or South America, but definitely in Europe and Russia.
No question. This is a
stabilized. We had a stabilized government, which enabled it to put forward, vast continental activity without the use of inscription and military compulsion.
We're talking about the beginning.
Right at the beginning, before the beginning. You're talking about before the beginning.
Can I ask a question? Just a point of information here, Ken. What American king/president was in power for 20 years?
FDR. A little short.
A lot shorter. It was just 32, the end of 1932 to the beginning of 1945. What you're probably alluding to the fact is that had he not died, he would have.
Okay, great. So
he would have been 18.
3 plus, good. 12 years.
16. He had a potential of 16 years. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I'm sorry. That's it. It's the old math. I got it wrong. I said 20 years. It never would have been more than 16, right? If he did the whole four terms. There you go.
If I could respond to Frank, it's about the French Revolution. It's not so much stupidity, it's anger. People the economy was tanked. There have been famines before. The royal government was very incompetent, especially under Louis XVI. People were angry and violence occurred. That's what happened. You can call it stupid, because they certainly shot themselves in the foot. but particularly when it comes to the Navy, even to this day, a slang term for the Navy is La Royale, means the Royal. And at that time, up until the Bourbon regime, if you were, it was very traditional, and if you were a captain of a ship or you were any sort of an officer, you had to be noble. And so once the revolution happened, guess what happened to those nobles? They left. And so it left it's like if
Absolutely.
if your entire officer corps walks off, well,
right.
You know,
by 1795, they'd all gone.
Yeah.
So you got you have to understand, in a sailing navy, this is not like ships today. Anybody can just go in there and turn the key and basically figure out how to work it. Back then, you had to know the sea, you had to know currents, you had to know the wind, and you had to know how to, it's all very well to know how to maneuver a merchant ship, but to use a frigate, and then you needed 20 years to be able to be an admiral, okay? And they all left. So it was a walkover for Nelson. Once Nelson figured out that these clowns don't know how to maneuver, they don't know how to maneuver like you're supposed to. Whereas in previous wars, the French were awesome. Look at the Battle of the Chesapeake, which determined Yorktown. They knew how to. They had the best gunners. They had the best fleets in many ways. Now they lost at certain battles, but these were tiny losses where they lost, one or two or maybe three ships, maybe four. But once the Napoleonic War, there's no Spanish fleet around. There's, at Trafalgar, instead of Gravina being in charge, it was this Villeneuve guy who was worthless. Okay, and he made mistakes. So, they didn't even tack properly. They didn't do anything right in terms of the Battle of Trafalgar. So you're right. They lost absolutely everything and refused to acknowledge that actually the Spanish were the ones who knew what was going on as far as how to control a fleet in action. And so, here you have a situation that enabled, back in the time of 1775 to 83, you got French navies and Spanish navies doing an awful lot of damage to the British. I mean, yeah, the British just managed to hold on to Gibraltar, but that took everything. And that means they would never have anything more than a couple of brigades fighting in the south, against, Gates and the rest of them. And never have anybody at all because the biggest landing was at Brooklyn with 15,000. They never did that again. So, it enabled Washington to win, thanks to Rochambeau and the arrival of the French. And that would have stayed. And actually, the problem was that the French economy, even though their debt was half that of the Brits after the loss of the Americas to the rebels, they couldn't handle it. There was stupidity all around. But
the debt, right. The debt was another thing.
Yeah, but the debt was twice in Britain. The Britain had twice the debt, but they also had, of course, the stock market and many advantages that the French didn't. But that still, nevertheless, they should never have guillotined their own.
Okay, but let's say France held on to Louisiana, and let's say Spain held on to California. What do you think would have, and Florida? Okay, so what do you think would have developed by 1900 or 1920?
I already said the Americans would have taken it anyway.
Yeah.
Why? How? How are you going to do
population? Just sheer population. The way they took it.
No. You've got Spain holding on to the viceroyalties, okay, of South America. You've got enormous fleets. I mean, okay, well, presumably once the combustion engine came in and you got steam power and all that stuff, it's going to change. But up until then, you're not going to have all this powerful potential of the Mississippi, because you try anything against France and Spain, they're just going to take out your fleet pretty much, because you've got no fleet. I mean, America had no fleet at all. And first of all, they ticked off the United to the Brits. So unless they sided with one or the other.
Well,
but still,
the thing is, all that land of the U.S. Southwest and of what was Louisiana, there were next to no people there.
Yeah, there were. There's Tecumseh. Tecumseh would have sided with somebody. I mean, this is what happened.
Tecumseh was in Michigan.
I know, but there was a confederation that went all the way down to Mississippi, possibly. You know, the Creeks would have joined with all the rest of them. And, you know, there was a potential for them they sided with the Brits. Had they sided with the French? Had they sided with the Spanish? It's a big deal. You know, we had a lot of luck on our side because...
I mean, it's terribly...
Frank called it. You also have to remember something else. Actually, two things that I should say, try to slip in here. One is that Tecumseh allied with the British, and most First Nations peoples allied with the British because the British had signed a pact with them prior to the American Revolution that the British would not take their lands. So they had a particular pact with the British.
They'd also had pacts with the French under a Montcalm and all that stuff way back when.
Yes, they did, but not quite to that extent. Also, I have to take issue with you saying, from a different point of view, I'm going to take issue with you saying that the French were stupid because, yes, it's one thing that, you know, the majority of the population could say we want to be a great power, but more important than that, they wanted to eat something other than cake. And unfortunately, when it came down to it, what the French people said, I'm not talking about some of the lawyers who helped facilitate the revolution, but the revolution was about the fact that you had a totally polarized society when it came to food, at the very least.
No, there's more to it than that. There's a lot more to it. It is about power. It's about
power. The fact of the matter is, people, I'm talking about just regular folks, said to themselves, I don't have enough bread on my table. And therefore, I don't care if my country is a great power. I got to feed my family. So I'm just introducing another point of view to this.
Well, yeah, you're right. You're right. There was that. But you're not talking about everybody in France saying, I'm starving, okay? You're talking about mostly what are they? The arrondissements of Paris, you know, and it's Paris making the decisions, and it's a power play too. And you know, you got people like the brother of the king, Orleans, voting for his guillotining because they had, you know, this is rivalry within the a monarchy, and it's like taking advantage of it. It's like no love lost there, and you've got decent people like Mirabeau dying. You've got Danton, you've got, of course, Robespierre and the rest, nut jobs like Robespierre. These are the people making the decisions, the Montagnards and all the rest of them. Was it the Montans? It doesn't matter. But yeah, these people are making a decision on behalf of those who are, quote, starving. Yeah, it was a decision that was in retrospect, and nobody does look at it in retrospect, especially in France, because it's always seen as the most glorious moment in their history of this revolution, because getting rid of the king, where it was so stupid in reality, because they went into a series of wars that lasted 20 years.
Right.
And it was dumb. It was just dumb.
So let me interject here. So there's this famous TV series called Something in the High Tower about what if Germany won the war. This would make a very interesting series of binge TV, The Man in the High Tower. Right? This would make a very interesting, binge TV program if France didn't stayed here in Florida and in Louisiana, and if Spain kept California, would have been a whole different world.
Even if there was all women and transvestites, otherwise it will not be on Netflix. It will not be on Netflix. Have you seen the new Tolkien thing? It's like
no, I can't watch it. It just troubles me too much. It's fucking crazy, and it's just appropriation. They're just putting in there. It's like, look, it's totally reasonable in a high school. If you've ever been in a high school performance, you have to put on a play or a musical that has 50 parts because every kid wants to get on the stage. So you need a lot of parts. So, okay, in a high school or something like that, you can dish these parts out to whomever. In fact, I saw a fantastic dinner theater presentation of La Boheme that was diverse. And they were all fantastic, and it didn't mean a damn. It didn't matter because it was the character, the personality, and the voice, and the competence of the delivery was just wonderful. But it's just something, Snow White or the Mermaid, and they just want you to believe everything. And I've seen there's been a lot of historic movies with multiracial participation, but it was realistic. It was like, yes, this guy, like, Othello or some other guy coming up from Africa, or, slaves in the Middle East, and who were in the Middle East, slaves were made lieutenants and things like that in Rome.
Yeah,
so it could be appropriate, but it's just
first of all, Ken,
political. It's just political.
Ken, I have to tell you something. I think
What?
you meant elementary school, because when I was in junior
High school.
I was playing Algernon in The Importance of Being Earnest.
Uh-huh.
And I got to tell you something. The vast majority of the population of my school did not want to be in an Oscar Wilde play. So,
all right.
We
Okay,
didn't have to worry about creating parts. But go
Okay, all right. So,
Well, I mean-
but in any event, I want to. So I totally agree, but that's a big social topic that, there's going to be. I don't know if we did a survey here. Probably most people are starting to shift off to becoming anti-woke. I'm starting to see articles on the internet and so forth, and I go,
Well,
we know.
there's certain things I like. I mean, I see a Shakespeare. I saw a Shakespeare of Julius Caesar. With the entire cast was, from Harlem, black Harlem. Okay?
Right.
And
It worked.
It really works because a good stentorian voice of the lead.
Yes.
It's awesome to listen to. It's awesome
To be or not to be, that be the
Exactly.
question.
Well, that's because, Frank, great acting is great acting. It doesn't matter.
And
Yeah, but
also,
but the trouble is when I get a woman doing Richard III, it's like, no, it doesn't work. I'm sorry.
It doesn't always work. It's hilarious. Anyhow, I want to go to this thing about the Ukraine. It's a pundit, or he's a lawyer, talking about the history of referendums in the Donbass area, whatever it's called. So let me put that up because it relates to what we were just talking about.
Where's
politics.
Alex?
Alex is, I think, doing, whatever. And Alex is in a movie with Gail. He went to the movies with Gail.
he went to the movies. He's not in one. Yeah.
He's went to the movies with Gail. And Jim is, on a bender. I don't know what he's doing. So let me do this. Let me share this. And here it is. And here we go.
Russia was shelling its own, has military capability of that kind of level of sabotage. So I was on the Duran last week with the two Alex. Alex is talking about this and a wide range of foreign geopolitical issues for about 2 hours or so. People can go back and find that. We discussed this as well. But both people of our locals board, vivabarneslaw.locals.com, best board in America. The brought up, some people that had military training. Some other people emailed me as well and explained how this could be done and why we were likely responsible, because some of them were in the very units that had trained to do precisely this kind of activity. So part of its diving skills, they may have incorporated drones. There was a 17, 18-hour gap between the two explosions, one hitting the other. It's an environmental catastrophe, potentially. It's interesting. But the mainstream media is not talking about much of that, and the European Union is going to blame Russia, just like the Donbass was shelling itself. Russia was shelling its own, the nuclear power plant that was under control over. Now Russia is blowing up its own pipelines and destroying its own leverage. Seeing how much dumb stuff you can get American people and the people in the West to believe. Sadly, many are still gullible.
So this brings us to the actual legal question now. Russia held a referendum in the eastern provinces, I think the Donbass region.
Yeah, Donbass, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, which are Luhansk and Donetsk.
And that is whether or not they would like to join Russia, or was it separate from Ukraine, become independent, or join Russia?
It was kind of both. It was declare their independence from Ukraine and ask that that Russia recognize them and join them in. It was almost identical to the Yugoslavian. Putin is deliberately using the Yugoslavian example.
Okay. And I mean, that's where the legal question comes in. The vote, by the way, these elections can be challenged because it's Putin. No other elections can.
Yeah, exactly. I heard, a lot of people had doubts about how this election was conducted. Now, the election had a bunch of international observers. And then afterwards, the EU started threatening anybody who participated in simply being an election observer to see whether the elections were done in an honest and accurate manner. There's nobody really disputes the election results. Now, I think that the people that did not vote were mostly no votes. So like in the Kherson region, I think that would have been much closer had everybody voted. But Ukraine told people not to vote, or they would consider them criminals if they retook the property and locked them up. I mean, Ukraine was guaranteeing that this vote would go a certain way and guaranteeing intensifying opposition to Ukraine within those regions. It was a very peculiar action for someone that purports to claim this population as their own. Very unusual. But so it's pretty much identical to the international legal precedent set at the behest of the United States and the West that ultimately reached ahead with the International Court of Justice in the Kosovo case. But its forebears were Croatia, the whole breakup of Yugoslavia, which Kosovo was part of too, which included Croatia, included Bosnia-Herzegovina. It also included other neighboring regions like Slovenia, the split between the Czech Republic and Slovakia. All of the sort of post-Soviet breakups, there was a certain legal pattern we recognized as legitimate under international law. We successfully argued to the International Court of Justice that Kosovo's unilateral declaration of independence was not illegal at all, and whether there's whether there's an independent part of a state is simply a internal state issue, and that somehow, despite many years of U.S. formal legal promises to recognize territorial integrity, the United States government, maybe I'll post the extended brief the U.S. government wrote to the International Court of Justice in 2009, penned by the W administration, reinforced by Obama, so it crossed political lines here, which said that, no, respecting boundaries doesn't actually mean respecting boundaries. So the International Court of Justice said yes. They said that you can declare independence. That's a matter of internal dissent. You can create your own government. You can form another government. You can join another government. And that all that's completely legal. And one of their premises was, as long as there's some kind of referendum involved, that really makes it legal. And so that's exactly what Russia did. They took the precedent. Now, they argued against everything that took place at the time, by the way, especially in Kosovo. But they lost those arguments before the court. And they're like, fine, we'll use your standards and borrow them and imitate them. So under our own standards that we've set, we can't make any legal complaint under international law against Russia's actions.
And I'll bring up, let me bring up a tweet from Justin Trudeau. This question is particularly funny in the context of Canada, where Quebec once, twice held a vote to separate a referendum. Trudeau, the man himself who respects peaceful protests and women's rights, when it comes to recognizing this, says Canada condemns Putin's latest comments about Russia's referendums. The outcome of these referendums are not legitimate, and Canada does not and will not ever recognize them. I repeat, Ukraine's territory will remain Ukraine's.
And basically take that same language and you could apply it to Kosovo, to Croatia, to Slovenia, to Slovakia, to Bosnia, to Kosovo, to all those places. And Canada took the exact opposite position. They didn't say, we will always recognize the territory of Yugoslavia. Just the opposite. So ran to encourage it, incentivize it, reward it, support it, recognize it, and then put military bases there. So Putin is just replicating our own precedents. From an international legal basis, there's no grounds to critique Russia's annexation of those regions after the referendum that took place. Now, I'm not a fan of this way of changing alliances, but there are two counterpoints in the American tradition. One is, of course, the American Revolution itself. We declared a right to declare our independence, and found that was a legitimate grounds to separate from another government, and so forth. Even more analogous is Texas. Probably the closest historical analog in American history to Ukraine and Russia is Texas. A bunch of Americans populated Texas while it was under the domain of Mexico. The Americans decided they weren't being treated well by the Mexican government. And so we supported their unilateral declaration of independence. Hence, remember the Alamo. We have a memorial to it. That's why I get a kick out of Americans say, oh, this is outrageous. You could never do this. It's like, I guess you think we should not remember the Alamo then, right? They're unaware of their own history, or unaware of its clear analogy. And then, of course, we invaded to protect the Americans in Texas and then declared its independence. So what Putin is doing in southern Ukraine is not only identical international legal standards to the precedent we helped create in Yugoslavia, it's identical to how America got founded and how Texas even exists as part of America.
Robert, I mean, the vote, 95%, I just get...
In the Donbass, and then it's like 87, but if you include the non-voters, like there were 30% in the Kherson region that didn't vote. You could fairly infer those were mostly no votes. So my guess, and that's consistent, as Richard Barris, People's Pundit, put out. You could have guessed this. You could have forecast this vote if you knew what the 1926 census was. because it's the same Russian area dominate populations of that region. Russian ancestry, Russian tradition, Russian language, Russian culture, Russian allegiances, Russian economic alliances, you name it. It's most intense in the Donbass, the Donetsk and Luhansk provinces, but they don't occupy all of the Zaporizhzhia, I think that's how you say it, or the Kherson region. As part of those still occupied by Ukraine. The parts that they occupied were disproportionately more Russian. And now Kherson, in a vote where people felt comfortable voting no, would have been probably 60-40 is probably where it would have been. But everybody knew Patrick Lancaster covered a lot of this on the ground, talked to people in all the different regions. International observers were present. A lot of the myths being propagated out there that people were forced to the vote with guns on them and all this gibberish is just nonsense. It's more bad propaganda from the West. But what it reflects is Ukraine deliberately forced that population not to participate by what they said. If you were pro-Ukraine, you couldn't vote. So that always made sure that the vote would have a certain outcome. And then the second aspect is there has been migration since the war. My guess is that, and this was in the Patrick Lancaster reports, people that were pro-Ukrainian have left some of these regions since Russia's occupied them, and people that are pro-Russian have come into these regions since Russia occupied them. So that's where like Kherson was like a 50-50 split, slightly pro-Russian in past elections. Again, going all back to even the census in the 1920s. The rest of the region, the Donbass was like 95% for breaking off way back in 2014. So everybody knew which way that was going to go. And certain parts of those attendant regions were the same Zaporizhzhia region. Kherson is the one that, if it hadn't been occupied, would have been a very close vote.
Someone in Rumble, on a Rumble rant, Manix37 says, how can these elections be held in areas not occupied by Russia? I mean, I think that's definitional. A referendum will not be held in an area that is part of Russia.
Right. I mean, Ukraine obviously. I mean, they did hold referendums in the early '90s on these things, and a lot of these same regions didn't want to separate from Russia, and then the Ukrainian government just ignored these. So a lot of these populations have voted in the past. The Ukrainian government has just refused to recognize the referendums. In the early '90s, they refused to do so. They refused to recognize the 2004 election that they didn't go their way, so they had their first orange color revolution. Didn't like it when it went that same way in 2010, and ultimately had the Maidan coup. When they had the same referendums in 2014 in response to the Maidan coup, they didn't recognize them again. So these populations have been voting, especially in the Donbass, over and over again to get out of Ukraine. And the Ukrainian government has just refused to recognize them.
And what of Ukraine's now, I don't know, new application for NATO recognition? Is there not a policy?
It was already rejected.
It was, okay. And isn't there not a policy?
It was political theater. The Zelensky still playing tough guy. It was funny. He went out with one of those press conferences, and the two people next to him actually have normal height. So he makes you look like Goliath, Viva. That's how big.
Robert, I think he's still taller than me.
I doubt it. But he said he'll never talk to Putin, that sort of thing. Putin gave a pretty prominent speech that was followed by a lot of people. I put it up as part of the Barnes brief at vivabarneslaw.locals.com, a summary of it and a link to the whole thing. Pretty extraordinary speech. Whatever you think of it, it's going to be a very memorable speech in time. It'll be one of those top 10 speeches in the last 20 years, maybe even longer time frame, because of how seminal it is about the change and shift to where the world is going, and especially where Russia's going within it. But they made clear they're never giving back this land. So the only question now is whether Ukraine settles. They won't, even though Kissinger is saying they should, because he can see the writing on the wall like anybody else. And they took back this abandoned town called Liman. That had like 500 people in it. All they wanted to do was hold up the Ukrainians for a while they buttressed their troops elsewhere. And the Ukrainians were acting like it was the taking of the hill or something. They're not going to win. It's that simple. Their efforts have been mostly unsuccessful, and Russia has now called up another 300,000 troops. Now has legally the big change for Russia is internal legally. They now consider any attack on these regions an attack on Russia. So they will label it a counterterrorism action or even a state of war, which frees them up legally. They will probably start to target civilian infrastructure, electricity, anything that helps the military at all. What we call dual use infrastructure. So we consider it free reign from the get-go, but Russia is more restrained than we have been historically. And so Ukraine's in for a lot of trouble, despite us sending billions of dollars more over there. I don't see their ability to catch up to where the Russians are. They're trying to occupy regions that clearly don't want to be part of Ukraine anymore. So probably never did, in truth. So that have returned, in their view, to their homeland. There's not much hope for success, but that won't stop us from spending lots of money. Colonel McGregor was talking about sources close to Zelensky, talking about building a dirty bomb to set off someplace. I mean, these people are insane. But the Biden administration is equally insane. So we'll see what happens. But the legally, from Russia's perspective, it will only get much more aggressive now in the conflict.
And the interwebs say that Zelensky is 5'7", which is 1.5 inches taller than him.
I bet he's 5'3". You can see him next to these normal-looking people. I bet he's 5'1". I'm gonna say 5'1".
No, if normal in Russia or in Ukraine is normal in the States, you set me up against anybody normal in the States, I'm a foot shorter to everyone.
He looks 2 feet shorter. Maybe he's 4'5".
It doesn't matter. People,
And,
here's the link.
I think we got the point here.
We're going to start.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we should get into the discussion here.
Yeah.
Because these guys are going to go on and on. I just want to say something because I know Frank's going to rip them limb from limb. So I just wanted to get two things in there that I noticed that they got dead wrong. One is that the referendum in Canada, in Quebec, the referendum went against the separatists. So it was held, and basically the vote was not by that wide a margin, but against separating from Canada. And second of all, and this goes to, I mean, that is something that happened within Canada. What the difference in this situation is, there have been according to international law that was decided after the Alamo and all the other, most of the other examples they cited. If a country invades another country, one sovereign state invades another sovereign state, first of all, they didn't even have the right to hold the referendum. According to international law, I believe, somebody can look it up and find out exactly what it is, but according to international law at the present day, if you invade a sovereign state, you can't just hold a referendum and then say, okay, this is part of ours. If you militarily invade another sovereign state, you cannot. I mean,
according to who? What level of law is that? Who said so?
Well, that's international law. These are international.
Well, no. What body? What international body? The UN? Which body?
I believe that probably might be the internet. That might be the Hague. The International Court in The Hague, but I would imagine the United Nations recognizes it also. But this is something actually that even Alex Stavropoulos, who, boy, that clip looks like it was brought in by Alex, but it was. But even he admits to that. So the referendum really doesn't have any legal standing, as far as I know. If somebody wants to look it up and find out, I'm not an international lawyer.
Well, I mean, the point he made, you can dick around with, somebody doesn't like it. But he says the entire breakup of Yugoslavia and other states after Glasnost, including the Czechoslovakia is now the Czech Republic, and Slovakia is a separate state. The Sudan broke into two states, North and South, and all the states in Yugoslavia broke apart. No more Yugoslavia. So that's very contemporary. That's not in 1800s. That's not the 1800s.
Those were not done as a result of and under the aegis of an invading another sovereign state invading that state.
Oh, well, that's your standard. That's what you're bringing up. But the other issue, the other thing he brought up was
no.
He said there was a history of.
Basically, Ken, hold it.
Yeah, go ahead.
What I'm basically saying is that, as far as I know, and again, somebody can look it up and find out if this is indeed accurate. But as far as I know, that is against international law.
Right.
So
which is. But international law is just a pretense. Nobody has to abide by international law.
But Ken, international law, I mean, there is no, you're right. And then anybody can do whatever they want.
Whatever they can get away with. Whatever they can get away with. Saudi Arabia is putting down a revolution in Yemen.
These guys weren't arguing that anybody can do whatever the hell they want as long as they have the power to do it. These guys were arguing that legally Russia was justified. And that is a major flaw in their argument.
Okay.
Don't
Legally-
forget that Russia had, I think, signed 3 treaties promising to respect the sovereignty and the borders of Ukraine.
Ah,
And another thing that my blood was boiling when he was just talking as if he knows about those 4 regions. That he's spiking out of his ass for that, for the last
they both
referendum.
are, yeah.
And when he was talking about the 1991 referendum, he was dead fucking wrong. And I posted the link in the chat. You can look at the percentages of the different regions of Ukraine that voted for independence. There's not one that didn't get more than 50%. The only one that came close to 50% was Crimea. No, these people wanted to get independent.
independent from Ukraine.
No. Every province in Ukraine voted to go independent in 1991.
Independent from what? From whom? From Russia.
Russia. Yeah.
Not they voted to be part of Ukraine.
They wanted to be every region wanted to be part of an independent Ukraine,
Including the Donbass, or whatever it's called.
all of them.
Okay. Good.
And granted, there was a greater percentage in the West and less in the East, and the lowest independence vote was in Crimea, but even that was more than 50%.
Okay. Great. So now let's go to Frank.
Essentially,
Get closer to the mic, Frank.
yeah, I essentially agree with them. But the issue is, I mean, this kind of stream of consciousness, legal consciousness that he's got, is it's a technique. I mean, he contradicted himself at one point. He said, the Kherson Oblast, words to this effect, they voted 87%. It would have been half if there hadn't have been the occupiers there, which is like, okay, so ergo, this vote doesn't make any sense because there are occupiers in it. And obviously, once you have an invading army present there, he said there was no threats to anybody. But that he just contradicted himself by saying that because 87% said yes, while there are occupiers, had the occupiers not been there, there would have been 50%. So ergo, there's a threat there. So so that's what he said. So, but then the issue is that there is an argument out there. There is always an argument, and he's going to say they're still going to lose, the Ukrainians, despite the fact that these gains they're making day by day, as we speak, by the way, are colossal failures on the part of the Russians and on the Russian military. So, at this point, it's Putin's regime that is in danger of basically collapsing. Within, it's quite possible that if Ukraine keeps up the momentum, now it is true that he's correct in stating that the Russian army has not been encircled in Lyman or anywhere else. They've taken a lot of casualties, a lot more than the Ukrainians, but they have pulled back to subsequent positions. But they are there is a formula of victory that the Ukrainians are simply repeating over and over again. It's not just, they've got very, very maneuverable forward elements that are very hard to target. They've got many hundreds, if not thousands, of drones. They've got, more and more equipment arriving, but they've particularly got, as I keep saying over and over again, precision munitions. And there's so much footage out there, for instance, of a BMP full of, say, 5 or 6 soldiers stopping when they've been spotted. Everybody gets out. Once it stops, it's a target. And then a few minutes later, it explodes. It's hit by a precision munition. The Russians cannot do that. So this is a formula. It's just a momentum, as I keep saying, that cannot be stopped by the Russians. And this ultimately will put Putin in a bind. And, this guy dismissed the idea that the Russians took out Nord Stream 1 and 2. They probably did, okay, because it would have been easy for them to do it. using pigs, which are the things that go in the tunnel in the actual Nord Stream.
In the pipeline
So
internally.
yeah, internally, it would have been easy for them to do it and probably seal it a little way up, so that only part of this is corroded. So in other words, they could have timed it. Actually, they could have done it fairly easily, and it would have made sense for them to be able to do it that way.
Why would they do it? I don't understand.
Well, I mean, I think it's a Putin decision. It's like, first of all, he is in a situation where, this is, again, we've discussed this before. This is not a democracy. It's not like LBJ can just walk away.
Right.
He can't. He can't walk away. So what he's basically telling everybody is, listen, there's no way out. You're not going to come back. You're not going to say, okay, without Putin, we can do Nord Stream 1 and 2 again. There is no Nord Stream 1 and 2. Mm-hmm. I'm it. So,
It's like Saddam Hussein with the oil wells, setting them on fire.
Yeah, exactly. I thought of the same thing.
Right. It's like there's no, you can't backtrack. You can't pretend, okay, if we remove this guy, we can go back to the status quo ante and the situation normal again. No, can't do it. He's made sure of that, and he's probably covering his, he's covering his ass, really, and CYAing all the time. And, he's crossed the Rubicon. He's mobilized hundreds of thousands. And basically he tied, this is a mafia boss who's tied everybody close to him to his own ship. As it goes down, they all go down. And that's what he's tried to do. Now, whether or not that can continue, there's got to be a Judas somewhere in there who take this guy out, maybe, don't know. When he sits down with him and says, I'm going to use a nuke, that's going to be interesting, because I don't think they're going to go with it. I don't think they're going to go with it at all. He can threaten all he likes, but, it's like that's one step too far, and he's a dead man. But that's my take, and I think it's going to happen very, very shortly, because there's nothing stopping the Ukrainians at this point. Nothing. I mean, they've got no backup. And as far as, putting these new troops in, they need a line. They need a line to defend, and there are a couple, it's true. But, the momentum is with Ukraine. So I'm thinking, what is the purpose of this guy's argument? It has resonance with those who want to listen. I mean, obviously, if you listen to Tucker Carlson, why are we giving money to Ukraine? There's no explanation. What's the explanation? You don't know. I mean, it's like there are no principles, apparently, that the United States stands for. Nothing. It's just as if, we're this is a Trumpian way of looking at things. It's all about the deal. We're not standing for anything. We stand for our own selfish aims, and why should we stand for anything else? I mean, this goes against the grain of why we fought wars, but there are those who are, accepting of these fallacious arguments, and it's just a shame. But, Alex is a classic case. It's like he looks at the United States as some kind of imperialist nut job that's tearing the world apart, when in fact it's the absolute opposite. It's holding it together.
Right.
Yeah. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, hey guys, that's it. We're close to 8 o'clock. And I'd like to end the night with a little song, and rather than picking up another subject that might cause derision. So let me put this up, because somebody mentioned the name Royal, and that just, I've got
the French Navy.
Yeah, 1 second. I've got to get it. Where is it, Nam? Where are you, honey? Let's go history. Oh, no, that's no good. 1 second, and I'm going to get it. Here we go. There we go. That's it. Okay, great. So this has to do with royals. That's the only reason I'm doing it. Where are you? Oh, there we go.
It's not that Meghan Markle stuff. No.
No.
I've never seen a diamond in the flesh. I cut my teeth on wedding rings in the movies, and I'm not proud of my address. In a torn up town, no postcode envy, but every song's like gold teeth, gray goose tripping in the bathroom, bloodstains, ball gowns, trash in the hotel room. We don't care. We're driving Cadillacs in our dreams, but everybody's like crystal, Maybach, diamonds on your timepiece, jet planes, islands, tigers on a gold leash. We don't care. We aren't caught up in your love affair, and we'll never be royals. It don't run in our blood. That kind of luck just ain't for us. We crave a different kind of buzz. Let me be your ruler. You can call me Queen Bee, and baby I'll rule. Let me live that fantasy. My friends and I, we've cracked the code. We count our dollars on the train to the party, and everyone who knows us knows we're fine with this. We didn't come for money, but every song's like gold teeth, gray goose tripping in the bathroom, bloodstains, ball gowns, trash in the hotel room. We don't care. We're driving Cadillacs in our dreams, but everybody's like crystal, Maybach, diamonds on your timepiece, jet planes, or tigers on a gold leash. We don't care. We aren't caught up in your love affair, and we'll never be royals. It don't run in our blood. That kind of luck's just ain't for us. We crave a different kind of buzz. Let me be your ruler. You can call me Queen Bee, and baby I'll rule. Let me live that fantasy. Oh, 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 oh. I'm bigger than I ever dreamed. And we'll never be royals. It don't run in our blood. That kind of luck's just ain't for us. We crave a different kind of buzz. Let me be your ruler. You can call me Queen Bee, and baby I'll rule.
And that's it. Brought it to an end just a little bit before the end. And that's it. Thanks for being here. And this was Going Viral. Mark Whitman, Frank Radford, Dennis Goldstein, Mike Jankowitz, and Ken Aaron. And see you next week.